Monohybrid cross, the name suggests mono means one. That means in monohybrid cross, we'll be studying about one pair of contrasting character. So Mendel has selected a character for height, and for this he has taken two sets of pure breeding pea plant. The first had a tall height and another one had a dwarf height. So the tall pea plants are those plants which had a height above 6 feet, whereas the dwarf pea plant were those plants which had an average height of 1 foot. So Mendel has taken the homozygous or the pure strain. So when we talk about this homozygous or pure strain, they are going to be homozygous tall and homozygous dwarf. So we represent them as homozygous tall would be represented as capital T, and homozygous dwarf would be represented as small t. Mendel cross-pollinated these homozygous tall plants with the homozygous dwarf plant, which could be represented as T cross-pollinated to small t, and this generation is referred to as the parent generation or the P generation. Now after their cross-pollination, they produced the seed which were then collected and grown, and they produced the hybrid plant, and all these hybrid plants were tall in nature, and they were called as the F1 generation or the first filial generation. Now, Mendel allowed this F1 generation to self-pollinate, and after the self-pollination, the seeds were collected and grown, and after growing, the generation that we found was the second filial generation or the F2 generation, and in this generation it is observed that 75% plants are going to be tall, whereas 25% are going to be dwarf. So Mendel concluded that the ratio of tall is to dwarf plant was 3:1. The same thing is represented over here. So we can see we have the parental generation of homozygous plant. So this is homozygous tall and this is the homozygous dwarf plant. Now gametes would be formed, and their gametes is going to have a capital T and this is going to have a small t. Now after the fertilization, we are able to see that all the plants of first generation, that is the F1 generation, are going to have a combination of capital T and small t, but the visible character is going to be tallness. So all the plants of the first generation are going to be tall. So here we can see genotype, that is capital T and small t, whereas phenotype is going to be all the plants are tall. Now when these plants are that is self pollination is taking place, so here you can see the gametes formed are capital T small t, again capital T small t, and then we can make this Punnett square. So here it is like that, and here we can write capital T small t, here again capital T small t. So this combination, here you can see capital T, then you can take capital T small t, then capital T small t again, and here small t. So we can see all this four combination, 1, 2, 3 and 4, and this four combinations. So here is the genotype, that is capital T is to capital T is to small t, and their ratio is 1 capital T, 2 capital T small t, and 1 small t, that is 1 is to 2 is to 1. And when we talk about their phenotype or external visible character, we see that 3 of them are tall and 1 is dwarf. So this 3 are tall and this 1 is dwarf. Mendel raised an F3 generation from the F2 generation by the self-pollination. So we know that the genotype of F2 generation was capital T, capital small t, and small t. He observed that when this dwarf plant were self-pollinated, he observed that F3 generation had all the dwarf plant. So he found that dwarf plant of F2 generation produced only dwarf plants on the self-pollination. He also found that this 25% of the pure tall plant are going to produce all the tall plants in the F3 generation. So of the F2 tall plants, only 25% were pure tall and they produced all the tall plants. But when this hybrid type was self-pollinated, the result was 3 is to 1. So 3 tall plants were observed and 1 dwarf plant was observed in the F3 generation. So the remaining 50% of tall plants on self-pollination produced tall and dwarf plant in the ratio of 3 is to 1. Now Mendel repeated the similar experiment with other characters like flower color, seed coat character, etc. And he also noted that result of all this experiment showed a similar pattern of inheritance. He found that one of the contrasting feature, in this case it is the dwarfness, was not represented in F1 generation. That is, its effect was masked. So in this case we have seen that in F1 generation all the plants were tall, none of the plant was dwarf, and this was observed in all other experiments as well. And he has also noted that this contrasting feature which was hidden in F1 generation reappeared in the F2 generation. And then he has seen about the ratio also, that this feature were approximately always in a ratio of 3 is to 1 in F2 generation and in F3 generation as well. Now let's take a look at Mendel's interpretation of the result. So Mendel interpreted his F1 and F2 result as follows. He said that height of the pea plant, that is tall height or short height, is controlled by a pair of contrasting factors or determiners, which now we know as genes. And a plant is tall because it is going to possess the factor of the tallness, and another plant is short because it possesses the factor of the dwarfness. So here you can see a plant is tall because it has a factor of tallness, and it is a dwarf plant because it has the factor for dwarfness. And because of this, a law was established that is called as the law of unit characters or factors. He also stated that these factors always occur in pairs, that is in tall plant capital T or capital T small t. So you can see they are always in pair. In the case of dwarf plant it is small t again in pair. So one member of this pair is going to come from each parent, that is a male parent and a female parent. For example, if this is the characteristic in an offspring, so this is going to come from a male parent and another one is going to come from a female parent. And he also said that all the F1 plants are hybrids and have the factor capital T small t. So here we can see, we have already seen in the monohybrid cross that the F1 generation has the genotype of capital T small t and it has both the factors, and they are going to be tall in nature because this capital T factor is going to dominate, and hence the expression of dwarfness is masked, and we can say that tallness is going to be a dominant character whereas shortness is going to be a recessive character, which is called as the law of dominance and recessiveness. So we know that in hybrid plant the character that is represented is going to be the dominant one and the character which is masked would be the recessive one. These determiners or genes are the separate entities, and when the gametes are formed, only one of this is going to go into each gamete. Let's take an example. If a plant has the genotype of capital T small t, but during the gamete formation, in each gamete only one part can go, either the capital T or the small t. And thus the F1 plant that are there, they are going to produce two types of gamete, and these gametes are going to be equal in number, and this law is called as the law of segregation. Now there is a possibility of different combinations, so plants can either be capital T, capital T or small t. Hence in the case of F2 generation we can see these genotypes and their ratio is 1 is to 2 is to 1, and when we talk about the tallness and dwarfness ratio it is going to be 3 is to 1. 3 tall is to 1 dwarf.